favorite monster, animal, and vermin. Now, I left out certain creatures which they're not really aberrations. I think like the owl bear, which is the prime example of D&D's let's take two animals and shove them together monster design philosophy in certain cases. You have the owl bear, you have the owlphant, you have the armadillophant, and other such creatures where they just shove animals together and create a new creature. I left those out of aberrations. I don't think all of those would be considered aberrations in 3rd edition. I think they'd be called magical beasts. But even if you can... Well, I was going to say even if you consider them an aberrations, owlbear is one of my favorite creatures. It's not the one I'm going to talk about on the favorite monster overall video, but it's very close. But I left those out, and I'm not going to include them here in animal or vermin either, because they're not like real animals or vermin. Having said that, though, I am going to include dire and giant versions, because those are just the same creature but bigger, and they don't really get any magic abilities, they don't have any weird powers, and even if an owl bear doesn't have any magic abilities or weird powers, it's still a giant owl head on a bear's body, and that's weird. So we're going to leave him out. If you look at 3rd edition's art, actually it's 3.5 and especially 4th edition, someone in the art department in Wizards of the Coast got the idea that the word dire meant spikes. Because if you look at a picture of the dire wolf, it has bony spikes. If you look at the picture of the dire bear, it has bony spikes just growing out of it at random. It looks stupid, it looks silly, it's not intimidating, it doesn't make the monster look scary or cool. I don't know why they did it, it's just dumb. Dire is supposed to mean... Well, when they originally came out with the dire creatures in early 3rd edition, it was supposed to be a throwback to a more prehistoric version of those creatures. Back when things were bigger, stronger, and dumber. And later on, they just decided, let's dire all the things. And you ended up with spikes on things. A dire bear was just an even bigger bear, but with spikes on it. Then you have vermin. And I want to include giant vermin, because very few people have ever used a normal-sized spider as an enemy in a game. But plenty of people have used giant spiders. Very few people have probably used any regular-sized insect as a combat threat. You can definitely get away with using a cloud of wasps or something as a threat, but not as something that the players are supposed to attack, or that the players really even have an option of attacking with their swords and bows. Try and take out a wasp swarm with your sword by swinging it like you would to hit any other creature you wanted to kill. It would be very difficult. But the giant versions are awesome. So, of all those things, if you think about normal animals for a moment, most commonly you're going to encounter them in D&D in the form of animal companions for druids and rangers, and familiars for wizards, and depending on which version of D&D you're playing, possibly sorcerers, witches, etc. The familiars are usually smaller animals. You have like house cats and toads and hawks and ravens and turtles, things like that. And they are usually forgotten about. There are games where people make great use of having a familiar. There are games where having a familiar is included in what goes on all the time in play. In most games, having your familiar remembered by the DM is always a bad idea, because losing your familiar can have serious penalties. So most people just, I have a familiar and we'll forget about it. It just gives me this passive bonus to one of my skills. Hooray! There's a joke in Order of the Stick, and it happens dozens of comics, if not a couple hundred comics into the run, where Varsuvius the mage, who I haven't read Order of the Stick recently, so I don't know if they've ever gotten around to mentioning if Arsuvius was male or female. That's kind of one of the running jokes in the series. But I'm going to say he, where he just suddenly remembers he has a familiar. And the rest of the party's like, where'd he come from? What do you mean, where did he come from? He's been here the whole time. He's my familiar. And it parodies regular D&D play very well. On the other end of that spectrum, with the animal companions for druids and rangers, they regularly see combat. The selection of animals that they get to choose from is kind of deliberately slanted towards combat. And I would say probably 9 tables out of 10 that you sit down to play with D&D, particularly if it's new players, any given ranger or druid is going to choose a wolf for an animal companion. It works out really well. If not a wolf, then a dog. But that's what I would imagine happens at 9 out of 10 tables, because it's happened almost every single time I've ever had a druid or a ranger. The only one who did differently was my friend Pat, who played with an eagle. Pat was a weird spellcaster in that, one, he could never remember that the spells were listed in the player's handbook in alphabetical order. I am not kidding you when I say that we would literally tell him it's in alphabetical order 3 times every time we played, at least. Because he'd go to look for a spell that he could cast, and he only ever cast the same 3 spells over and over again. And he's like, why can't I find Call Lightning? It's in alphabetical order, Pat. Look under C. Why can't I find... what was it? Barkskin is another one that he would cast. Call Lightning, Barkskin, Magic Fang, things like that. He could never find them in the book because he was never looking in alphabetical order. He kept thinking it was listed in spell level order. The other cool thing about Pat was he could, when we were in combat, probably for a good couple sessions, every combat, he hit pretty regularly with his bow. And then I started watching him, and I was the DM in this game. And he was rolling a d12 all the time, but he was always rolling like a 9, 10, 11, or 12 on it. It was uncanny how often he hit. And then we kept reminding him after that, you need to roll a d20. They're similar, a d12 and a d20. They're both the big round-looking dice. But once he got onto the d20, his hit percentage actually went down, which you wouldn't expect. Oh well, anyway, when it comes to animals in-game, that is probably the majority of where you're going to see them. Then you have the predator model for low-level adventures. You'll generally see players, they might get attacked by wolves, they might get attacked by a lion, they might get attacked by some carnivorous apes. Very rarely will you have, or bears are also a very big encounter for normal animals. Very rarely will you have a party attacked by a stampede. It's happened. It was in the rules in 2nd edition. But that's something that is cool to think about, too. Insects are probably... And vermin. Actually, vermin includes giant rats. Giant rats are a very common enemy for low-level characters in 3rd edition and Pathfinder. And giant insects are probably the majority of where you're going to see animals and vermin in a game. So, of them, I will say everybody loves giant spiders. They're creepy, the imagery for them is great. It's really easy for players to imagine being in battle against a giant spider because it just pulls the fear right out of their nightmares into the real world. And by real world, I mean their imagination. And they have poison, and they can spit webs, and there's all kinds of fun stuff to play around with. That said, I would say that giant spiders are probably my 2nd favorite animal or vermin to use in a game. From the player side, I've always been interested in playing a barbarian. There used to be a prestige class, there might still be, in 3rd edition called the Bear Warrior. I think that's what it was called. But anyway, it was a barbarian, but when you raged, you'd turn into a bear. And as you gained levels, you turned into a bigger bear. So you went from a medium-sized black bear to a large-sized grizzly bear to a huge-sized polar bear, or something similar to that. I think it was maybe black bear, brown bear, grizzly bear. I forget exactly how 3rd edition partitioned their bears. I always thought that was really awesome, and I always wanted, and I do have, as always, an NPC who is an orc barbarian who, using the sacred tattoos and calling upon the shamanistic spirits known to his people, when he enters a rage, turns literally into a giant bear. Although not just like an animal bear, a kind of like werebear-ish beast. Also not appearing on the list of animals and vermin, were creatures. That probably increases the amount of times you'll see a quote-unquote wolf or bear or tiger or rat. But I don't know if they should count as animals and vermin, considering they're just the animal form of what would otherwise be a magical beast lycanthrope. But I want to say my favorite vermin is most likely the giant centipede. They're actually one of the smallest giant vermin. Your giant spiders, they can be small size, but I think they kind of default to medium size. So you have these spiders that are like 5 feet across. And giant scorpions also tend to be medium size. But giant centipedes are small. They're a foot long. But oh my gosh, I can't tell you how often I have creeped out at the thought of a 1 foot long centipede. It's right on the edge. See, like a 6 foot wide spider or giant scorpion, sure, it's creepy. In a dream, it would freak you out. But when you if you give it half a moment's thought, you're like, no, that could never happen. That's too big. It's ridiculous. There's no way that you're going to get an insect that big. Biology just doesn't support it. But a 1 foot long centipede, oh yeah, you can get that. In fact, I think there are 1 foot long centipedes in the real world in certain places, and I don't want to be anywhere near them. Multiple legs on a creature is freaky. Anything more than 4 is too many. And the thought of a giant centipede that's maybe about 4 feet long, that's when you get into the oh, it's too big to ever really exist kind of idea. That mindset. But a 1 foot long poisonous centipede is creepy. They're very thin, they're very long, they can crawl in and out of rubble, they can pop out of cracks that any other creature you would dismiss that as an avenue of attack. And they feature prominently on the Wandering Monster table for the first level of the Runes of Trocare, as you're poking about the city runes, and you might encounter the bandits, Kellam's raiders, or you might encounter the orc tribe, or you might encounter one of the necromancers or their agents. There's a very small, not very small, there's a smaller chance of wandering undead, but my gosh, giant rats and giant centipedes are on that list. By the way, giant rats eat giant centipedes. So if you ever want to control your giant rat problem, all you got to do is get rid of the giant centipedes. Alright, that's it for today. Until next time, bye-bye.